So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to you. This is an unusual occasion for us because it's the very first time that we are in partnership with the FLAX Foundation. I'll say something about it in a minute and give the word also to Mieke Verloo to do that. It's the very first time that the IWM has the privilege, the honor to present the Emma Goldman Awards. This is the inaugural ceremony, and a very warm welcome is what I would like to extend to the 6 prize winners of the very first round. I would like to take the opportunity to welcome 2 people, 2 women actually, who have been long associated with the IWM. Long association is probably not even the right description for Cornelia, who founded the IWM. So, without Cornelia, no IWM. Cornelia Klinger is going to give the keynote this evening. I'm going to introduce her briefly just before the keynote. I would first like to just take you through the evening's program and then proceed one after the other. The story begins with Mieke Verloo, who is a non-resident permanent fellow of the Institute, calling up out of the blue last year and saying, there is a new foundation and it'll give some awards, and could the IWM please host the awards? And once I heard what the awards are about, I immediately said yes, but I asked for more. So it was like Oliver Twist. I said, if you are giving us the award ceremony, we want more. And what we want more is that we would like to have some of the awardees with us, spending time with us here, to be able to institutionalize that which Cornelia Klinger set in motion here, which are 2 foci of the Institute, gender and inequalities, both of which we now would like to reestablish in a much more strengthened form. Mieke herself has contributed to both of these with 2 very large EU projects here at the Institute. So there is a tradition to which we can come back to. And so it's wonderful to be able to welcome both of you back, comrade in arms here, and in the name of Emma Goldman, a remarkable woman, an anarchist, a pacifist, a feminist, âme à la lettre, an anti-militarist, someone who, interestingly, was a participant, not only a witness to, but a participant in almost every important movement for social emancipation from the 1880s to 1940. And be it in the US, be it in Russia, then her great disillusionment with Russia, be it during the Spanish Civil War, be it for women's rights, be it for human rights, there was just no progressive emancipatory movement to which Emma Goldman didn't contribute, on which she wrote, or in which she was a participant. And I just want to give you 2 quotations from her work, which I was going through very briefly the other day as a small preparation. And when I read it, I said, the most violent element in society is ignorance. And I think there is really something to be remembered there. And then in her book, My Further Disillusionment with Russia, the first book was called My Disillusionment with Russia, the second one called My Further Disillusionment with Russia. I think she today would have written further, and further disillusionment with Russia. She says, the ultimate end of all revolutionary social change is to establish the sanctity of human life, the dignity of man, the right of every human being to liberty and well-being. And I think these awards, which are established in her name by FLAX Foundation, are a sign of giving visibility, giving preeminence to engaged scholarship. So it's scholarship that quality, the excellence of your work that we would like to, of course, give the award for. But it's not just scholarship, which is ivory tower scholarship. It's scholarship which is really engaged with the world in the way that she was. We're going to learn something more about her, so I'm not going to say anything more about her for the moment. I'm going to give the word to Florian Duijsens, who is going to give you an audiovisual presentation on Emma Goldman. Florian teaches at the Bard College in Berlin. And what is probably more important, he's the co-founder and co-host of the Dead Ladies show in Berlin, because he has decided that enough dead men are being honored all over the place. It's time that we honor some dead ladies, but also the right dead ladies. And therefore, Emma Goldman would be among probably the most important of the dead ladies of the last century, who needs to be honored. And I give you the word. I come back very briefly to introduce Cornelia, who then will give the keynote address. I come back extremely briefly to introduce Mieke, because I think that is very important that we take you through the tradition of the feminist scholarship we've had at the Institute, through the personal histories of the two women who are really important for us today as well. And a very warm welcome to all 6 of you who have won the awards. We'll hear more about you, with Mieke giving a short introduction to your work and then handing over the fellowships. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Okay. Oh, I have a mic. Oh, yes. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So while we wait for the visuals to load, I'm just going to move this aside carefully. Yes. And this aside so you can see not just my beautiful shirt, but also... Oof, Jesus. Okay. Ah, yes. Okay. Ba-dum. So the Dead Lady Show is something my friend Katie Darbyshire and I founded in Berlin about 6 years ago almost. We just Tuesday did our 25th show in Berlin. It's a bilingual show, 2 presentations in English, 1 in German, of women who did amazing things while they were alive and are sometimes forgotten, sometimes not. But this is a great time to turn off your phones, by the way. And so we've been doing this for a while. It's been really exciting to we got some funding from the city of Berlin for it. The concept has spread. There's been shows in New Zealand. There's ongoing shows in New York now at the KGB bar every month. There's a touring show in Belgium, shows coming up in Holland, in Leipzig, all over the place. It's very exciting to be part of. And tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about Emma Goldman on this wonderful occasion. I'm going to start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Born in what is now Kaunas, Lithuania, then part of Imperial Russia in 1869. Emma was born into a Jewish family of low-grade Tolstoyan unhappiness, as biographer Vivian Gornick calls it. Her cold mother never stopped grieving the loss of her first husband and resented Emma's father, her second husband, for blowing her inheritance on a series of failing businesses and then moving their family of 8 to Königsberg, Popelan, and ultimately St. Petersburg. Here on the left at the top you have Emma. Her 2 older sisters had left at this point, escaped, and you can tell by the way she's leaning away from her family that she also wish she were elsewhere. Emma was whipped and beaten by her father. Her teachers also resorted to physical, mental, even sexual abuse. And though she passed her exams to go to secondary school, her religion teacher hated her so much for standing up to this abuse that he did not want to give her this required character reference because she was, quote, a terrible child who would grow up into a worse woman. Working in glove and corset factories from the age of 12, it's no surprise Emma felt restricted by a system so much stronger and more powerful than her. She started sneaking out to balls, to dances, reading very radical works of fiction, dreaming of revolution, dreaming of free love. But her father felt that she should just get married. She was 16 after all. And she objected, to which he replied, all a Jewish girl need know is how to make gefilte fish, cut noodles fine, and give husband babies. Infuriated, she threatened to kill herself if he didn't allow her to migrate to America and move in with her two sisters in Rochester, New York. But in the land of the free, Emma was just as stuck, living in a dark tenement, sewing heavy overcoats for 10 and a half hours a week for 10 and a half hours a day, making $2.50 a week, while the owners would sweat the workers, quote unquote, by charging them for their thread, their needle, their chair, etc. Soon her parents came over from the mother country, making her even more miserable. And at 18, she gave in and married a man who also hated work and loved books. This granted her U.S. citizenship, which was key, but he proved impotent on their wedding night, and she divorced him rather quickly, writing, "If I ever love a man again, I will give myself to him without being bound by the rabbi or the law, and when that love dies, I will leave without permission." To give you a little bit of the background of the sort of culture of labor and of exploitation at the time, between 1881 and 1905, there were 37,000 strikes in the US involving just about 9.5 million people. At least 500 of these strikes ended in bloodshed when state or federal troopers were called in. The victims of these massacres were hardly ever counted because since these were foreign workers, they literally did not count. If there was one event that really radicalized Emma, if that's what we can call it, it was the Haymarket riot in Chicago. This happened at a peaceful demonstration for the 8-hour workday, a very radical concept at the time. A bomb was thrown at cops in retaliation from them shooting at strikers the previous day. The bomb killed 7 cops and at least 4 civilians, but the police violence after that killed many, many more. And though the actual culprit was never found, the police simply arrested the 8 most prominent anarchists, tried them for murder, and executed 4 of them. Revolution, it won't surprise you to hear, was very much in the air. So, here you have a little bit more of that. So Emma moved to New York City, to the Lower East Side, $5 and a sewing machine in hand. On her first day, her very first day, she met Alexander Berkman, this dude. Sasha, as he was called. He became her lover and her best friend for life thereafter. She also met Johann Most, who ran a German-language anarchist publication called Freiheit, one of 300 such publications going in America at the time, in English and Russian and German and Yiddish, anything. Both of these men were avid anarchists, and both also supported the idea of political assassinations, which were very big at the time, if you'll recall. And Most started grooming her, both in the sexual sense of the word and also to become an anarchist agitator. Very suddenly, Emma was off on her first lecture tour in German, mind you. At first, she stuck to the script that he provided for her, but by the time they got to Cleveland, she was speaking from the heart. She wrote, "In a flash, I saw it. The factory, its drudgery and humiliation, the failure of my marriage, the Chicago crime. I began to speak. Words I'd never heard myself utter came pouring forth faster and faster. The audience had vanished. The hall itself had disappeared. I was conscious only of my own words, my ecstatic song." And she in these speeches, she figured out how to relate her own experiences to those of the people in her audience, and how their relatively small demands, right, 2 hours less work per day, tied into much larger struggles happening throughout a society. She berated them for their cowardice. She urged them to stand up for themselves, and they loved her for it. On her return to New York City, most tried to woo her back as his protege, but she had found her calling. I flared up, declaring I would not be treated as a mere female. I blurted out that I would never again follow blindly. At 21, she would help organize a cloakmakers strike, organize dances for them. At one such dance, a young cousin of Sasha's took her aside very seriously. She writes, "With a grave face, as if he were about to announce the death of a dear comrade, he whispered to me that it did not behoove an agitator to dance. Certainly not with such reckless abandon, anyway. My frivolity would only hurt the cause." I grew furious. I did not believe that a cause which stood for a beautiful ideal, for release and freedom from convention and prejudice, should demand the denial of life and joy. I insisted that our cause could not expect me to become a nun and that movement should not be turned into a cloister. If it meant that, I did not want it. I wanted freedom, the right to self-expression, everybody's right to beautiful, radiant things. It is likely this story that spawned Emma's most famous and apocryphal quote, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution," which is a great quote. Audre Lorde also loved it. Here she is on a lake in Berlin. It'll come back. And I loved it so much that I just kept adding slides of Audre Lorde being happy in Berlin with Emma Goldman. Anyway, for Emma, anarchism meant opposing all forms of government. Instead, people should be free to associate in groups and have all their needs met, each according to his ability, each according to his needs, as Marx would have it. Greed and envy, humanity's worst traits, would all melt away, and the truly free people would cooperate instead of being thrown into competition with each other. So she didn't really see the point of elections or unions, really. Neither would, in the end, overthrow capitalism or organize religion or the state. To give you a sense of how she operated, I'll show you a 20-second clip from the film Reds, which is 195 minutes. It's very good. Maureen Stapleton plays Emma. Here she comes.
The capitalists can take this country into war anytime they damn well please. The only impact you can make is in the streets.
Yes, of course,
but don't you think, Emma, that if Debs gets a lot of votes, it'll strengthen that impact?
No, I don't. I think voting is the opium of the masses in this country. Every 4 years, you're dead in the pain.
Yeah, but...
But indeed. In 1892, the Homestead Massacre would test Emma's convictions. Robber Baron Andrew Carnegie, you'll recognize his name, had tasked his operations manager, Henry Frick, with breaking the union at his Pennsylvania steel plant. After they were all fired, workers stormed the mill, which was defended by 300 hired Pinkerton men, at least 3 of whom died in the resulting massacre, in which many were injured and 7 workers killed. Sasha decided to assassinate Frick. This is Frick. Is also this Frick from the museum in New York. His old house. There's a couple of Vermeers. Just a few. I mean, there's like 20 in the world, but anyway. Emma helps plan it, even trying and failing to turn tricks on 42nd Street in order to help pay for the required costs. But though Sasha shoots Frick 3 times, the assassination fails. Frick survives, resulting in a 22-year jail sentence for Sasha. Emma would only admit to her involvement much later. She'd never explicitly support political violence either, but also never stopped defending anarchists accused of political violence. Writing, "As an anarchist, I am opposed to violence, but if the people want to do away with assassins, they first have to do away with the conditions that produce murderers." When her old mentor Most got on stage to protest Sasha's actions, Goldman actually rushed the stage, hitting him across the face with a whip, then breaking the whip and throwing the pieces in his face. Much later, she would sort of apologize for this, saying, "When you're 23, you don't always act reasonably." Yeah. Amidst one of the US's worst depressions, 20 to 25% of people out of work, going hungry, Emma would stand on an overturned box in the middle of Union Square, New York, speaking to about 5,000 people. Men and women, do you not realize that the state is the worst enemy you have? It's a machine that crushes you in order to sustain the ruling class, your masters. Do you not see the immense wealth within a stone's throw of here? Fifth Avenue is laid in gold, every mansion a citadel of money and power. Wake up. Become daring enough to demand your rights. Demonstrate before the palaces of the rich. Demand work. If they do not give you work, demand bread. If they deny you both, take bread. It is your sacred right. The police stormed in. It became a riot. The tabloids were all in a frenzy about Red Emma, but also printing her every word in translation because she was still speaking in German up until this point. That would soon change. That's her mugshot. After arrested for inciting this riot, she was sent to Blackwell's Island, which is now Roosevelt Island, where she started training as a nurse and improving the prison's conditions. She was also tutored in English by Ed Brady, who was a newly arrived Austrian anarchist who she'd met at the salon, and he was in a corner playing with matches, and she walked up to him. She was like, "Children shouldn't play with fire." He was 20 years older than her. He replied, "All right, Grandma, but you should know I'm a revolutionist. I love fire, don't you?" Needless to say, they became lovers, and he introduced her to world literature. Emma reading Wilde and Whitman, Ibsen and Shaw, George Sand, George Eliot, all while inside. She also got rid of her rolling R's. Outside, 25-year-old Emma only grew more infamous, the press calling her the High Priestess of Reds, 5 feet of anarchy. Intrepid reporter Nellie Bly did slightly better and called her a modern Joan of Arc. On her release, the press were waiting outside and asked her if she was cured. But no. "I am more of an anarchist than ever," she said. "Society lies in its last convulsions. They cannot expect theft, murder, prostitution, and oppression to be gotten rid of unless the system which breeds rottenness is gone. My motto is as ever, death to tyranny, vive l'anarchie." The newspapers described her in obsessive detail. She has a shapely head, light bluish-gray eyes shielded by glasses, a small, finely chiseled nose, rather too wide at the nostrils for symmetry. When she smiled, her lips wreathed into lines that were uglier than when her face was in repose, making the interior of her mouth look black, or rather that dull, opaque hue characteristic of the mouths of some snakes. The press had an agenda, clearly. Emma moved in with Ed, rather, but he seemed very surprised that she didn't want to settle down and have kids with him. Had he ever been to one of her lectures? Probably not. "Being obliged to stay in one place for months, years, or perhaps an entire life," she wrote, "always having to spend time with the same people, drink in the same beer dens. This disconsolately bleak monotony of everyday life would fill me with horror." Ed figured she should at least continue her training and learn from the best, so off she went to Vienna to study nursing. She loved it, and not just going to see Eleonora Duse on stage, talking about Nietzsche with people who'd actually read Nietzsche, going to see Freud's actual lectures. "The gaiety and lightheartedness of the Viennese people," she said. "I longed to throw myself into its generous arms, to sit in the cafes or in the Prater and watch the crowds." Inspired by Vienna's air of questioning everything and of seeing sexuality as a critical force, she returned to the US even more committed and carrying plenty of contraceptives to distribute in the US. Now able to support herself as a nurse and a midwife, at least to the poor, because of course the rich preferred male doctors. In 1901, President McKinley was assassinated by a man who'd been to one of her lectures. Newspapers quoted him as saying, "Her words set me on fire." Emma was briefly arrested for complicity, her family kicked out of their synagogue, and she had to go underground, taking on the name of E.G. Smith. Emma was 32. This was when she was arrested. After running her own... That's okay. Thank you. It's a good picture. Okay. After running her own massage parlor on Broadway, she braved the spotlight again. People kept asking this E.G. Smith woman, like, oh, you're such an inspiring speaker. You should come talk to her, you know. She couldn't stay hidden for very long, founding the Free Speech League in response to a law barring anarchists' entry into the US, before dropping everything like you do to run a political theater troupe, an avant-garde political theater group from Russia, featuring future silent movie star Alla Nazimova, all from Hunter Island in the Bronx, now a park. Their performances helped fund the first issue of Emma's monthly magazine, Mother Earth. That's the first issue. With a print run of 3,000, it was dedicated to serious long reads on issues like birth control, education, prison reform, literature, contemporary drama, gender, racism, religious fundamentalism, all from an anarchist perspective. Run from her apartment. This one, there's a little plaque here. It would go on for 12 years and feature the likes of Margaret Sanger, Voltairine de Cleyre, Darwin, Tolstoy, Gorky. At 10 cents an issue, Mother Earth required constant fundraising to stay afloat, so she toured lectures on everything from modern European drama to homosexuality, women's independence, or my favorite, the right to be lazy. And organized annual masquerade balls, at one of which she danced something called the Anarchist's Slide, while dressed as a nun. It was a waltz. At one lecture, Emma met the love of her life, hobo turned gynecologist, Ben Reitman, an exotic, picturesque figure with a large black cowboy hat, flowing silk tie, and huge cane, she wrote. He looked a handsome brute. His fingernails, like his hair, seemed to be on strike against soap and brush. A strange charm seemed to emanate from them, caressing and stirring. They slept together that same night. Their letters, a lot of them have been saved, preserved, are absolutely red hot, using code words for their genitalia. One breast was Mont Blanc. The other was Mont Jura, I think. 10 years younger, Ben became her lover, her impresario. All her friends absolutely hated him. For a decade, they would spend at least half the year on the road, her speaking 2 to 3 hours a night, Ben hawking pamphlets and distributing contraceptives. In 1910 alone, this meant 120 lectures in 25 states in 37 cities, speaking to about 37,000 people who basically had a choice between the ventriloquist or like the gospel revival tent, and now were introduced to all these radical ideas. Though she did not take up Oscar Hammerstein's offer to give 10-minute speeches between acrobats and clowns on Times Square, she was a welcome guest at places like the Harvard Law Students Association and all kinds of socialite salons in Manhattan. Emma always remained a bridge between militant activists on the one side and larger liberal audiences on the other. The Little Review's Margaret Anderson wrote, "Life takes on an intenser quality when she's there, something cosmic in the air, a feeling of worlds in the making." Yet Emma did not join the suffragettes. Oh, this is Hammerstein, sorry. This is a theater. Other things. Right. Yet Emma did not join the suffragettes' call for the right to vote or work. What is gained if the narrowness of the home is exchanged for the narrowness of the office or factory? She, asked within reason. As a sexual radical, Emma wanted to ban marriage. "Conditions cannot be changed until this infernal system is abolished," she wrote. "I demand the independence of woman, her right to support herself, to live for herself, to love whomever she pleases and as many as she pleases. But despite her public defense of free love, it was much harder to privately reconcile herself with being in a relationship with a man who was literally scouring her audiences for groupies to sleep with while she lectured. She wrote to Ben, "The woman you have awakened into frantic, savage, hungry life recoils from you, feels outraged because you have thrust her aside for a moment's fancy, because you have outraged her sacred shrine, that tent, O God, where passion held its glorious, maddening feast. The agony that our love has not saved us from the same coarse, vulgar scenes of the ordinary has completely paralyzed me." She was devastated. Don't misunderstand, though, in later life, in much later life even, she would have passionate love affairs with other much hotter, much younger men than Ben until deep into her 60s. After the Russian Revolution and when the US joined World War I, to get back to the history side of things, speaking out against the draft or even government policy became very dangerous. 4,000 to 10,000 people were arrested on brutal new sedition and espionage laws, the Patriot Acts of the day. With strikes and protests sweeping the country, Emma became a linchpin in free speech cases across the US, arrested time and time again. Undaunted, Emma would speak to, helped found the No Conscription League, speaking to thousands and thousands of people. There she is back on Union Square. To give you a sense of the sort of furor she just brought with her wherever she went, on arrival in San Francisco, at some point, the police chief demanded to know if she was planning to blow up the American fleet, which was currently, at that time, in the San Francisco harbor, to which she answered, "Why waste a bomb?" Soon, however, she'd be arrested for real, Emma grabbing her toiletries and a copy of Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Having reading material in jail was key, she felt. She always had a book on hand in case she was arrested. Tried for sedition, Emma and Sasha, of course, defended themselves in court. It must be decided sooner or later whether we are justified in telling people that we will give them democracy in Europe when we have no democracy here, Emma said, arguing that they defied the law in order to declare it unjust, much like, and here she's not very humble, Jesus or the founding fathers had in the past. The jury nonetheless found them guilty, which left Emma sewing 36 jackets a day from a Missouri cell she had decorated with crepe paper. On her release, J. Edgar Hoover, of the FBI and of being secretly gay, he believed Emma to be the most dangerous woman in America, had her and Sasha deported to Soviet Russia. Actually, government agents had spent the past 11 years trying to kick her out of the country, but since she was a citizen, this was tricky. So eventually they actually denaturalized her original husband, remember the one in Rochester, in order to be able to take her citizenship away. Poor, poor United States government, she wrote. True, you have Emma Goldman's citizenship, but she has the world, and her heritage is the kinship of brave spirits. Not a bad bargain. Plus Russia, right? Sacred ground, magic people destined to redeem mankind. I have come to serve you, Matushka. Take me to your bosom. Let me pour myself into you. Mingle my blood with yours. Find my place in your heroic struggle. Now, despite knowing the complicated position of anarchists in Soviet Russia at the time, the reality Emma faced on the ground proved to be the rudest of possible awakenings. There was hardly any food or fuel, no freedom of expression, state surveillance everywhere. And when Emma wrangled a meeting with Lenin, she did have that kind of pull. He snapped back that freedom of speech was a bourgeois luxury. Severely disillusioned, she wrote, Soviet Russia had become the modern socialist Lourdes, to which the blind and the lame, the deaf and the dumb were flocking for miraculous cures. Before the Great Purge began in earnest, they escaped. But J. Edgar Hoover had put all of Europe's intelligence services on alert, so the two of them were forced to roam to Riga, Stockholm, Berlin, where she was assaulted on the subway. by anti-Semites. Wait till things change, then we'll fix you just like we did Rosa Luxemburg, they said. So off she went to London, where she was constantly freezing, and warmly received by the likes of H.G. Wells and Bertrand Russell, at least until she started explaining how the horrific Soviet dictatorship had been the direct result of the revolution. In order to be allowed to stay anywhere, Emma needed a passport, so she married a willing Welsh coal miner / anarchist, and Emma, aged 65, became a Brit. Another unlikely savior stepped in, and Peggy Guggenheim, why not, bought her a little cottage in the very sleepy town of Saint-Tropez, which was very sleepy at the time. It was called Bon Esprit, but Emma would never live up to its spirit. Exile pained her, but here she wrote her 1,000-page memoir. It would be very well received, though her candor proved controversial when it came to writing about her love affairs. She left out the one with bisexual Almeida Sperry. There were limits to what her readers were expected to be able to accept. In a letter to Berlin's great sexologist, Magnus Hirschfeld, she proved years ahead of her contemporaries. It's a tragedy, I feel, that people of a different sexual type are caught in a world which shows so little understanding for homosexuals and is so crassly indifferent to the various gradations and variations of gender and their great significance in life. In the early 1930s, she starts lecturing all over Europe about the rise of fascism. And when FDR becomes president and the likes of Josephine Baker start to lobby for her case, she's even allowed to return to the US for 90 days. Now considered a harmless old lady. Here's a clip from a press conference. Here, mellow anarchist.
What do you think about Russia, Miss Goldman?
I consider Russia and America the most interesting countries in the world today.
How about Hitler?
I don't know him and don't want to.
What is your opinion of Italy?
Beautiful country minus Mussolini.
Miss Goldman, should the government here object to your speeches of anarchism, would you change them or leave the country?
I will leave the country rather than deny my ideas. I prefer to stick to my gun.
When they called her a martyr, she disagreed. Please don't feel that I've made sacrifices. I have followed my bent, lived my life as I chose, and no one owes me anything. I am no more respectable now than I ever was. It's you who've become a little more liberal, and it's never too late to progress. Only liberty is worth fighting for. This is the job I'll keep at until I'm either hanged or fall asleep in some other way. And she would, going to Barcelona during the Spanish Civil War, getting a glimpse of an anarchist democracy at work involving 10 million people. Of course, the horrific bombings, the foreign influence infighting between the anarchists and the communists put an end to that. And Emma settled into her final exile in Toronto. Yes. Canadian newspapers being very modest. And yes, just across the lake from her beloved America. She was 70 years old. She was not allowed to speak about Canadian politics. She was not allowed to talk about the impending war. A stroke she suffered during a card game silenced her forever, and she died a few months later on May 14th, 1940. She was buried in Chicago, right by the Haymarket martyrs. They led her back into the country after she was dead. All her life, she stood up to bullies, to the patriarchy, to capitalism and repressive states, always speaking truth to power. And though she may not have fully converted many of her thousands upon thousands of listeners and readers, her arguments, her wit, and her empathy did make them question their own assumptions, their own lives. If you want to learn more about Emma, you can, of course, read her memoir, freely available online, Yay Anarchism. This abridged version from Penguin is also very good, though both gloss over some key points. Or you can read one of her many, many biographies. I'd especially recommend these ones by Vivian Gornick and by Candace Falk. The one by Vivian Gornick is short and goes deep into the politics, and the one by Candace Falk has all those letters with Ben. So there's also, as you saw, the graphic novel version, and also recommended. And that was my talk. Yeah? Okay, good.
We can have that as the background. So Florian, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction to Emma's world, her life, one should say her many lives, and her work. This is a remarkable story indeed. Fortunately, I don't have to live up to it, but the 6 of you do, and I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to hearing from you on how your work relates to some of the themes that we've dealt with. Thanks very much. My task it is, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to introduce Colinear Clinger. I'm going to do this very, very briefly. For some of you, this may be like carrying coals to Newcastle, but nevertheless, she is going to be our keynote speaker, and I'm going to be very brief about some of the themes which connect her own work to the award and the intention of the foundation. Cornelia is a philosopher with a focus on political philosophy, on aesthetics, on social theory, cultural philosophy, a very broad palette of interests indeed. She has significantly advanced the field of gender studies and of feminist scholarship, both in philosophy and in social sciences. And the theoretical approach of intersectionality, race, class, gender, which she's going to address today, resonates with her lecture today, which has been central to her work. Since 2003, she has been an associate professor of philosophy at the Eberhard Karls University in Tübingen, but she's also taught in Frankfurt, in Innsbruck, in Cologne, Munich, Zurich, and Vienna. As I said earlier, she founded the Institute. She was a permanent fellow here till she left in December 2014. She, after the passing away of the founding rector, Krzysztof Michalski, she was acting director of the Institute for the 2 years before I had the privilege to take over from her. She helped build up the Institute, not only as an institution in Vienna, and decisively shaped its research profile with her own work. But, as I said earlier, she really established 2 major foci here on gender and on inequality. So it's a great pleasure to continue that with these awards and with the awardees who will spend time here. It's a lasting legacy of Cornelia's to the institution, which we cherish. She has a lot of publications. I just want to mention quickly 2. One out of sheer personal interest, because that is how I met Cornelia, and that is her co-edited volume Achsen der Ungleichheit zum Verhältnis von Klasse, Geschlecht und Ethnizität. She invited me to a conference in 2005, I think, which is the first time I was here at the IWM, and it led to the publication in which I have a contribution. But the more recent work, I think it comes out next year, is her book titled Die andere Seite der Liebe, das Prinzip der Lebenssorge in der Moderne, which addresses the link between social inequality and care regimes in modernity. In 2013, she was awarded the Women's Lifetime Achievement Award of the Austrian Ministry of Women's Affairs, and the minister giving her the award praised her, saying she was a feminist institution who has significantly advanced feminist research and theory in Vienna over the past decades. I would like to welcome Cornelia to IWM, the feminist institution, to the institution she founded. Thank you very much for agreeing to deliver the keynote on this occasion.
I feel a bit ashamed. Thank you very much for this invitation tonight, and as I used to say to fellows who spent some time at the Institute, some weeks or months, and usually after a while, after a year or more years, they came back. And I used to say that criminals return to the place of their deeds. So now it's me who's coming back. But actually, I feel a bit shy because I'm not a good choice. I'm the least suitable person to give a lecture on this occasion. Why? Over the 3 or 4 decades of my professional life in academia, I have developed a deep-seated aversion against grants, scholarships, fellowships, awards, and the like. And I perceive them as a symptom of a distortion and degradation that has befallen the cultural and educational system of Western societies over the recent years. That is to say, the decades of the rise and fall of neoliberalism, by chance or by a quirk of fate, the very period of my active life. Let me take a step back in order to explain. Wilhelm von Humboldt's groundbreaking idea of Bildung involved culture and nature, implying the idea of the unfolding of the branches, the leaves of a plant, the limbs of a living human being. In brief, at the outset of the specifically modern concept, culture and education were taken to be something organic, not just a fad of German Romanticism alone, but summarized in 1948 in his essay Towards a Definition of Culture by T.S. Eliot. Eliot writes, culture is something that must grow. Growing is an interactive process. Yes, you can. You should do something about it. You must prepare the soil, provide warmth and water, pray for sunshine and rain. But then you have to leave it alone and wait for the seed to take root, the flower to flourish, or not. There is an inevitable risk of failure in our nature-culture contingency. The wise concept of modern culture and education, as I tried to describe it, perhaps a little pathetically, has fallen into disrespect. It is denigrated as the Gießkannenprinzip, the Ur or plant watering principle, and thus the motion and its motives are being turned around from planting to digging for the heavy metal of talent, a coin in Roman parlance. Mind-grafting and drilling for human capital as a resource instead of spending the public goods, spreading warmth and pouring water on the education of the next generation. Even-handedly. Extraction instead of insertion. The greed for immediate revenues, returns instead of provisions. In short, taking of the young generation, what they bring with them, instead of giving. Let me add on one thing. I scorn not only the awards, but more generally, the obsession with excellence, preferably in clusters, though a contradiction in itself. This goes together with measuring the immeasurable, calculating the priceless, gorging the outstanding, the exceeding, the exuberance. The brilliant outlook of his or her excellency is absolutely incompatible with democratic values of equality or equivalence, parity or equity. This strategy is driven by a thrifty educational system bound down to the rigid austerity principle of the Ministry of Finance. Timid state institutions are shying away from the responsibility of applying taxpayers' money, and they try to find a loophole into the ranking, rating, quality control by quantification. As a result, the youngsters are forced to put assets into the showcase before they ever get the chance to obtain any. The institutions are unleashing a relentless rat race of perpetual competition among the most promising candidates. I have watched generations of young scholars writing project proposals after project proposal, vaunting future achievements, self-advertising, self-applauding, and at the end, celebrations, turning humans into the adorned oxen, belly dancing on Vanity Fairs in vain. Although the award industry is a traffic in futures, the awards named after are the heroes and geniuses, idols and superstars of the past. In this respect, the culture industry sets the trend, acclaiming the heroes on their birth and death anniversaries. In Austrian parlance, Jahresregenten, princes of the year, in particular in the domain of music, to be sold as sweets. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart may have been the first to suffer this fate. Mozartkugeln, Mozart balls, produced in Salzburg since 1890, Bachwürfel since Johann Sebastian Bach's 300th birthday in 1985. Also in Salzburg, by the same company, still by the same company, even if Bach never set foot there, as far as I know. And now, in the year 2020, we roll over Beethoven. We are, to put it briefly, we are perching on the remnants of our cultural heritage. We are clinging to the ruins of our glorious past like vultures, trying to squeeze life from dead bodies, which we kill over and over again by turning them into icons, mortifying them into commodities. It does not only not matter if it is the anniversary of a birth or a death that we commemorate, it does not matter either that we celebrate the winners or losers of the past. Actually, the victims may become more sexy, more shining heroes than the victors. There is a special romanticism of defeat and even more of sufferance in our all-round memorial culture close to martyrdom. Let me try to give you an example, and this is a reminiscence of my youth. A copy of the still well-known Che Guevara poster was, I don't know how it came there, but it was in our classrooms in our girls-only high school. We, the girls, in the late 1960s, early 70s, insisted on moving our paper idol annually from one classroom to the next in the course of our sour school career. We meant it as an act of resistance against the institution. Our teachers complied smilingly. Both sides, students and teachers, ignorant and ignoring what was going on in Chile, Bolivia, Cuba, Argentina. Raving over a dream world revolution we could and would not grasp, while the real world, the real life movement was violently crushed by the real world powers. At this point of my somewhat angry ponderings over tonight's lecture, the name Emma Goldman came to mind for the first time. I still recall posters, buttons, t-shirts, coffee mugs, and whatever else with scanned quotations from her writings. If I can't dance, I don't want to be in your revolution, even if it's not a real quote, never know. The right to self-expression is everybody's right to beautiful, radiant things. All right, but actually today, I cannot think of any two other phrases to match the late capitalist neoliberal ideology more perfectly than these sentences. They fit. This regime does not suppress our dreams, but wrings them from our hearts and drains all substance from them. It expropriates all kinds of visions and images, ideas and ideals, including those of revolutionary and liberation movements. Sorry, Florian. The mystification by dint of aestheticization through aestheticizing and facializing a hero, the sellout of a hero's face in the capitalist marketplace, occurred to Uncle Che Guevara irrespective of his reality. And of course, the overwhelming majority of the faces who qualify for the hero culture and glorification are male faces, with ever more birds to come back in our recent days. But no, for me it will not do, it will not satisfy my criticism that Emma Goldman is a woman instead of a man. I don't care whose sex or gender fits into this pattern that I criticize. Okay, when I first thought of the words that I have just now pronounced in your presence, it seemed to me I heard Emma Goldman knocking on the door of my mind. In the deep silence of my study, I heard her say, quote, Goldman, longer quote, let me make 2 points. You agree with me that it is of no avail for women to tread the same path that men have taken under the conditions of the established socio-political system of my days and the hegemonic economy of yours. My and your liberal feminist sisters have criticized me for not supporting the campaign for women's suffrage. But it seems that you would accept the reasons that I gave for my position. That is to say, you would agree with my contention that democracy as it was known in my days and as it is still hanging around in yours, it does not work. It may even be fascism in a different guise. Secondly, and you would also go along with me one step further, capitalism cannot be revised, reformed, reworked, modified, corrected, improved, cured, but must be done away with entirely. I don't know. Suddenly, I feel the 80 years that have gone since Emma Goldman's death on May 14th in 1940, my mother's dying day in 2006, is a burden weighing on my shoulders, and the weight of the unredeemed hopes of history is growing ever more heavy. Instead of an answer, I take refuge to turning around the question. Miss Goldman, as far as I know, you were considered to be the most dangerous woman in America. You were a formidable orator who could agitate, enthuse, and fire up the masses. Your ideas covered a remarkably wide array of issues, blending social and political emancipation with personal, individual, bodily liberation. Marx and Freud, as we came to say. You were intrepid and unwavering in your convictions. You defended persons and positions unflinchingly, some of them even unpopular with your friends and allies. Given all that, why did you not succeed? Why has the overthrow not taken place that you, along with many others, have ardently and bravely fought for? Miss Goldman, it is not about fighting a battle fiercely. It is about winning the war finally. Excuse me for putting this crucial question to you. It is somewhat unfair and comes only because it is you who is on my mind, sitting in my neck for tonight's event. Actually, it is a question to be asked to each and every revolutionary movement. No, perhaps not since the dawn of time, but certainly since the daybreak of enlightenment, the ensuing declarations of human rights in the French and American revolutions. Ever since then, and through the dusk of this very day today, since the first pair of a dual revolution, industrial and political, occurred, we have seen countless waves of riot, revolt, rebellion, insurrection, mutiny, and protest rising up and receding, falling down, until the next wave started to build up again. It has been, and it is still obvious from the early days of industrialization and urbanization onward, the expanding capitalist cum nation-state system did not, could not, and will not bring about equal freedom and free equality to universal mankind globally. Now, there is an almost audible silence, not only in this room, but resonating in my ears. And it is now that I have to speak for myself and stand up to the same question. To speak for myself, and if not for my entire generation, at least for my peers and companions. We, the post-1968 generation in the West, witnessed two events, to put it in a short version. The first is a negative experience. This was the fiasco of revolutionary activities of the international youth, students, or protest movement. The most radical and audacious spearheads were slipping off into terror, attempting violent acts against individual representatives of the established system. An act, as I concede, of comprehensible despair, but more or less repeating the idiocy, the faults and failures of the past. They should have learned the lesson of anarchism. To assassinate a banker or an industrialist by the name of Henry Clay Frick, Hans Martin Schleyer, Jürgen Ponto, to name some of them, as an act of propaganda of the deed, avails to nothing. It does not overthrow the hateful system, but gives an excuse to the executive powers to persecute and muffle opposition with the means of legal but all the more extreme violence, sending them to prison or to hell or to both. Second, at the time, instead of revolt, violent revolt, the idea of the long march through the institutions was reinitiated by Rudi Dutschke following Mao Zedong. In the long run, This strategy did have an impact on the institutions and on the civil society. Yet, what was even more spectacular, it did bring about deep changes in the movement that set out to take this long march. Not the workers' movement, but new social movements of different colors, peace, ecology, and cultural movements, sexual liberation, appeared on the scene, and last but not least, a new wave of the women's movement, sitting on the fence between the social, political, and cultural side of movements. And, more interestingly even, generating a new branch of theory, feminism. Taking its departures from the shortcomings of male industrial worker movement theories, Marxism, Trotskyism, and whatever else-ism that was narrow-minded, boring, and flawed, feminist theory flourished, thrived over the 70s, 80s, through the mid-90s. We started studying, not only turning the pages of old books, like Kafka's New Advocate. But soon enough, and at an astonishing speed, we started filling libraries. I think you still find the collection in this house. Filling libraries with our findings and new explorations. Women who read become dangerous very soon. We got, instead of an upheaval, we got access to university careers and curricula. And if you allow me to take pride in one accomplishment in particular, we discerned, differentiated, but then also integrated diverse axes of socio-political inequality and injustice, class, race, and gender. You may add some more to this triad. That is to say, we broadened the scope of theoretical understanding of the structures of power, of the regimes of domination, and the patterns of violence. You may have noticed by now that this is my turf, and I could go on for many more than the 20 minutes I have been granted, but hours and days and weeks and months and years. Yet, I do not only see you start yawning, but I also hear the by now almost familiar voice of Emma Goldman in my ear. Professor Klinger, with all due respect, but did you, your generation of feminists, of theorists, win the war? The short version of the answer is clear. No, ma'am. The long version and the explanation of the answer would take as much or even more time than my bragging about the feats. Let me put it bluntly. We have lost the cutting edge, the momentum of activism, the thrust of radicalism. We may have brought about change, small change, in society and institutions, and at the same time, they altered us. Even if this exchange in the transformative energy between opponents may be inevitable and also fruitful. My second point is a matter of deep worry. There are new concerns putting a challenge to our achievements. We still endeavor to cope with a hegemonic neoliberal late capitalism, a regime that not only exploits labor power during working hours from 9 to 5 in a day. Rather, this techno-turbo-driven integrated system of augmented reality and artificial intelligence buys and sells our physical, psychical, intellectual life energy, extracts, excavates all kinds of resources and turns them into merchandise. Not only what we produce, the goods we have, But what we are is targeted. Land grabbing, not only in the exterior world, but also, and much more importantly, in the interior spheres, the spaces of minds and souls. And what is more, while we are still trying to grapple the problems that I tried to indicate at the beginning of this talk, a new turn is taking place. After the glitch of finance capitalism in and about 2008, we witness a return of state authoritarianism, blending populism, nationalism, and other specters of the past. Let me remind you of the fact that in 2018, a EU neighbor state, Hungary, banned gender studies, an anyway watered down version of feminist theory, from the country's universities. Eötvös Loránd University ELTE in Budapest accepted this government dictate without protest. Allow me 2 more minutes to conclude. All things considered, we made some not irrevocable, not irreversible progress with our project of understanding global societal inequality, while we lost a lot of real ground with the rampant growth of material inequalities adding up to threatening power asymmetries, including the overwhelming armories all over the planet. As things are as they are, we still need non-governmental, independent, private institutions elemented by progressive, altruist, humanist, private donors to do the right thing, to realign radical activism and dauntless free thought. It is one of the not too few ironies of history that aesthetic and societal avant-garde had and still has to rely on partisan patrons. This is why I'm standing here tonight, to express my gratitude to Mieke Verloo and the FLAX Foundation. At the same time, let me congratulate the IWM to the wisdom of independence and engagement at the same time. Independence and engagement for the progress of civil society and humanity in difficult times. Thank you. But the final address, goes to my companion, Emma Goldman. Please do not only give your name, but send your spirit to the new project and the awardees. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelia, for these cautionary words. But I'd like to turn to Mieke Verloo to introduce the awardees. I stand between you and the awards, so I'm going to be extremely brief. I'd like to extend my own gratitude to the FLAX Foundation. You may be wondering what FLAX is in the foundation. I asked the same question and was given a very wonderful answer, which I want to share with you, which I was told. Flax, because it's a useful plant. It gives us not only linen, but gives us good oil. But what I didn't know about the plant was that it's a really tender, slender, slight plant, but so sturdy that it's impossible to cut. And those are some of the qualities that need to be celebrated, as we heard from Cornelia as well. It's an extraordinarily generous gift of the FLAX Foundation, these awards. And as I said, I'm very grateful that they are here. It's a private, independent foundation which really shares the spirit at IWM. Mieke Verloo herself, as I said earlier, is a permanent non-resident fellow of the Institute. She is Professor of Comparative Politics and Inequality Issues at the Department of Political Science at Nijmegen University in Holland. Her main fields of research have been feminist methodology, gender mainstreaming, intersectionality, social movements. She's written a lot on and worked with governments to actually implement policies against gender inequalities. The analysis, development, design of gender equality policies have been really at the heart of her research and teaching. And her work currently addresses strategies against gender inequality, marrying them to other axes of privilege and power, such as race, ethnicity, class, sexuality. So I leave now up to Mieke to introduce the 6 awardees and their work. All of them women of, and 5 women actually, and 1 man, of extraordinary courage in the way in which they have fashioned their academic careers. And I should say that as complementary to Cornelia's remarks about the mainstreaming of a certain culture of excellence, I think what you're going to hear is tales of academic courage and the ability to follow their own particular academic vision, regardless of academic and professional fashions. And I think that's one of the features which really makes your work outstanding in each case. The scope is very, very wide. I leave Mieke to introduce your work to you. This is, as I said, engaged scholarship at its best, and we really hope to not only have you with us this evening, but to welcome you back here and to be able to present your own work in your own words to the audience in Vienna. So thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be the chair of the FLAX Foundation. Not all the members of the board are here. One member, Petra Meijer, is unfortunately not be able to be here, but Jacqueline van der Pol is in the audience. So what I want to do is first start with explaining to you what are the criteria that we used to select the awardees. And I go back a little bit in between to Cornelia's talk, but not too much, because it would take too long. But thank you very much for your talk. So our criteria are, and it starts with simple things: extraordinary expertise on and engagement on with scholarship in the field of feminist and inequality issues. Well, we've seen that in the neoliberal university. A track record of substantial contributions to knowledge of feminist and inequality issues in Europe. We're still with that university, but then we depart, I think, because it says a track record of collaboration and solidarity. That's not always in there. Why are they not talking about that? It's very important. A public spirit, originality. That's called innovation usually, no? Because it's supposed to be linked to the economy somehow. Insight into their chosen field and a potential for future contribution to knowledge. So before I present to you these 6 people, and I'm sure you want to know all about each of them separately, let me point out that while they're very different, they actually have a lot in common. And let me tell you what they have in common. They have in common something that is at the heart of the criteria that the FLAX Foundation has developed to select the awardees. And that is a specific combination of exceptional talent and dedication with a strong and intrinsic and incurable commitment to create knowledge that can help reduce inequalities in our societies. So for our 6 awardees, if you would look closely at their CVs, you would see that this means certainly to go beyond the call of duty, but also at all times to miss career opportunities because of where their deep intrinsic motivation leads them. It also means that most of them besides encountering all too common hardships, such as discrimination, or the consequences of severe economic crisis, or the rise of authoritarian far-right political leadership in their countries, besides all that kind of hardship, they are all very familiar with occupying the role of the killjoy, the one choosing to point out the failures of our societies, of our cultures, our economies, our academia, knowing full well that this message will not be well received because it destroys our common illusion of the good society in which we live. So the Emma Goldman Awards are meant to honor and support these talented, brave, and much-needed people. This is not because they are the 6 best of them. There's no way you could measure that. But these people are deserving these awards, and we are going to give more awards in the future. So I think this is now time that I start presenting them to you briefly, all 6 of them. And I will do that in alphabetical order, but given that this is a bit too conventional, I will use the alphabetical order of their first name. So may I call Akugo Emoyulu to the... Yeah, you stand next to me, is that okay? Because your name is up. Yeah, you can hold on as what I do.
Very awkward.
Yeah.
Put that out there that this is very weird. Sorry.
Yeah, you can hold on to me or to me, anything. Yeah, okay. And I will be very brief because the goal of this presentation is that you get really curious. Really? I didn't know this person? I should read this person.
Yes.
That's the goal. Okay. Yes. Akugo Emoyulu is consistently analyzing our Western society, most strongly the UK and the US, in how it produces and reproduces inequalities on race, class, and gender, with a strong focus on women of color's activism and their strategies for survival and for change. Intersectionality is key to her, and it's real. It's not always real, no? No. She's outspoken, active in and outside of university settings, and working together with many, many others. She has a stellar record on public engagement and worked in a variety of grassroots roles before entering academia. But we've had Emma Goldman. No? We know people can have many lives in one life. So she has published extensively, not only academically, but also by writing reports, briefing papers, editorials, blogs, and she's very strongly present on social media and in classic media. I think you're a very strong presence on Twitter, right?
I am.
She's one of the very few scholars theorizing black feminism in Europe and has a book with Francesca Sobanda on this. As one of the too few black female professors in the UK, but not only in the UK. Does Austria have any black female professors? I don't think so. See, it's true. As one of the very few, she's always negotiating the dominant discourses of racialized and gendered European academia and society. So we think her work has a great and much needed impact on gender and politics scholarship.
They're having a debate about how
many
feminist professors are.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good.
That's good, that's good. Huh? That's interrupt. That's very good. Yeah. Can I? Thank you. So it's with great pleasure and on behalf of the FLAX Foundation that I'm handing you this.
Oh, wow. I don't want to drop it.
Fancy. I think it's plexiglass.
Oh, okay.
So, congratulations. Yeah, you can put it back in the envelope. And I proceed to the next person on my alphabetical list, which is Amat Macharik. Can I call you? Yeah, it's true, we should have had something for you to stand behind, no? Proudly standing next to Amat Macharik, the second person I'm introducing. She's working in my chosen country. It's also your chosen country, yes, right? Absolutely. The Netherlands, at the University of Amsterdam. And Ahmad Macharek is one of the very rare scholars that look into the relevance and the irrelevance of race in science and society simultaneously. So her entry point to this is forensics and forensic anthropology. And in her research, we think that she adds a much needed and new perspective where she looks at race, gender, and sexuality, where she studies how differences along racialized, sexualized, and gendered lines are made and displayed, and how they function as a base for society, societal inequality and injustice. She has initiated a chair, seminars, research programs, and successfully funded projects. She has an ERC Consolidator grant that is just about to finish to enable these lines of study, creating many opportunities for other, often younger scholars. Her very many public outreach activities are testimony to her public spirit and engagement, and they include reaching out to art through her contributions to exhibitions. She's also the chair of the Stichting Drowned Migrants Cemetery. It's a foundation that is committed to setting up a dignified cemetery for drowned migrants in Zarzis, which is a village in her native Tunisia. And it shows how much what she's doing is connected to what we all see happening, right? People die, nobody knows who they are. Forensic anthropologists can find out. No? So that's very good. So, Ahmad, it's really with pleasure that the FLAX Foundation is handing you a very... What happened?
I think you...
No, your name is not on it, so I will just put it in. Do you have Ahmad? Oh, you will all get one? Voila, it's okay. Voila, it's you. Congratulations. Yeah. You wanna? Yes. Yeah, and Akugo, maybe you get the right one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to.
Okay. Next up is Andrea Crisan. You heard about Hungary. You know what happens to CU. That's where she's working. And she's here and she's smiling. You know? I don't know how you do that. Andrea Crisan. She's coming from the study of international minority protection and anti-discrimination. Andrea Crisan has initiated and contributed substantially to an impressive set of comparative studies on gender and intersectionality in East and Central Europe, thereby countering and challenging the ongoing unwillingness of Western European scholars to understand the Europe outside the small but hegemonic West. She never tires of seeing and creating opportunities for herself and others to open the field for new topics, methods, teaching, or research projects, always bringing her deep expertise, enthusiasm, engagement, and working power to them. In her very strong list of publications, often collaborating closely with others, you have something in common, I said that. Gender-based violence is one of the important issues that she's working with. But also the institutionalization of intersectionality, what then happens when states try to do something about that, and democratic backsliding. Unavoidable in these times, but a sad topic, no? On this last topic, together with Connie Rogeband, she has also presented a background paper last year at the CSW, the UN Commission on the Status of Women in New York. So she's bringing her work also to places where they could listen, they should listen. So Andrea, it's with great pleasure that you get an award, and it's actually saying Andrea Crisan is very good. Congratulations. Okay, we're halfway, right? There will be food afterwards, but you want to know who are the other ones. Lucas. Yeah. He's Spanish. So, Dr. R. Lucas Platero is Juan de la Cierva researcher at the Social Psychology Department of the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona, and he's also Director of Publications of Trans Studies at Bellaterra Publishing House. So Lucas Platero's academic journey is strongly linked to his activist life. As a student, he was active in feminist and lesbian feminist organizations and also helped to create Spain's first LGBT university organization. He's gradually shifted his social activism to an activism based on academic research, to which he has made multiple contributions. He has a double line of publications. They have something else in common. They have these multiple lives, right? The first line of publications is intended for an academic audience in research journals, and you can find them, there's a whole list of them, specializing in political and social attention to sexuality and gender relations in Spanish context, but also on queer pedagogies, intersectional relations between disability, gender, and sexuality, and public policies. The second line includes a series of 9 books accessible to a general audience in Spanish. And don't forget, that's a world language, right? Don't think it's not English or something like that. It's not just because we cannot read it that it's, no? Okay. So due to the crisis, he had to combine academic work with being a teacher for the last 15 years, focusing on social community interventions. Nevertheless, he has received many well-deserved Spanish awards for his research and also for his dissertation. Since the start of his transition process 10 years ago, he's part of a small academic activist community. And that's also visible in his role in the Bellaterra Publishing House. So we are very, very happy to give you an Emma Goldman Award that is in your name. Voilà. Thank you. You want to envelope with it, people? Okay, next up is Marta. Marta Rolusco. We didn't ask for any year of birth, but we have a strong guess that Marta is our youngest. Anyway, she's assistant professor at the University of Warsaw, Institute for Applied Social Studies, and she's also the co-founder of the Fundus Feministici, a feminist fund in Poland. Marta is a sociologist with a background in public policy research. She's a former gender equality consultant and trainer. And the interaction between feminist movements and the state, and what are the effects of this for the possibilities for feminist change, is at the heart of her work. In her research on this, we think she shows a rare talent for grasping ambivalences, unintended effects, and complexities. Her research and work for NGOs, of which she has also done a lot of work, focuses on gender and sexuality, anti-discrimination, education, and gendered violence. And in difficult times, 2 years ago, she has co-initiated and realized, in fact, I met her somewhere when she told me of this utopian project, a new Polish feminist foundation that allocates small grants for activism led by women, transgender, non-binary, and queer persons, using a very innovative method. You know, if you have grants that people apply, and then there are selection committees, not with the Feminist Fund in Poland. The Feminist Fund in Poland asks all the people that apply to choose the people who will get it. It's amazing. It's just amazing. And this initiative, we think, in the times that it was done, shows great and much needed courage and civil society entrepreneurship. And we know you do that with other people, we know that. As a researcher, she's closely investigating and evaluating what the strengths and weaknesses are of this method and how it will evolve to contribute to further knowledge. So for this and all what you will do in the future, just like the other people, we are very happy to give you the Emma Goldman Award. We've one last awardee, right? We've been in Hungary, we've been in Poland, we've been in the Netherlands, and a little bit in Tunisia on the way. We've been in the UK and a little bit in the US along the way. But now we're moving to Italy. Rosella Ciccia. She's a lecturer in social policy at Queen's University in Belfast, but she's also a Marie Sklodowska-Curie Fellow at the Department of Political and Social Sciences at the Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence. Rosella Ciccia, in her work on gender and welfare states, we think, has a steady track record of solid methodological innovations that are an exemplary contribution to comparative welfare studies. In this, she has worked with and influenced a wide range of colleagues across Europe. I know this because I've been one of these people influenced by her. She's and probably, hopefully, no? She's a creative and rigorous scholar with exceptional expertise in comparative social policy, inequality, and care. Another significant contribution is that she integrates attention for the role of contentious politics and social movements in this research. Her position as co-convener of a section on care in the gender equality policy in practice also shows that she has not just attention for policy making, but for what happens in real life with those policies. She's a prolific conference organizer promoting new perspectives, most lately last year in a conference in Florence on feminist alliances. And we think that this extension of her attention from welfare state analysis to integrating contentious politics and alliances and social movements with it shows great promise for the future. So you are the last of the 6 with your R in the name. So voilà, here's your award. Congratulations. Thank you all for listening. Should I call everyone to join us downstairs?
Yeah. Please join us downstairs we'll raise a glass to the awardees. There's food and drink. Just come down the stairs with us.
Yeah.